fuck. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. It's tempting to want to stop here and say that the problem, the ultimate fishhead, is psychopaths and people taking happy pills to deal with psychopathic conditions. But that's sidestepping the main issue, which is why are we, the rest of us, not doing anything about it? So what's the connection between psychopaths and happy pills? Empathy. Simple human empathy, or the lack of it. Psychopaths don't have it, and happy pills kill it.
For me, what's interesting is I wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect, and the Lucifer story is identical to the Adam and Eve story. And they're both stories about the horrific consequences of disobeying authority, God. You could be God's favorite angel and become the devil. You could be God's favorite human and be cast out as a traitor, as an infidel. And so that message, which is really deeply impacted, certainly in Western civilization, leads us to be blindly obedient to authority. So the famous research by my colleague Stanley Milgram shows that at least 2/3 of all people, of all ordinary citizens, when told by somebody who seems like an authority to physically punish someone else, they blindly obey. So going back to the famous study by Stanley Milgram, in which he gets 1,000 ordinary citizens from 2 towns in Connecticut to believe that they are teachers trying to help a learner learn by punishing errors, but the learner, who is actually a confederate of the experimenter, and the teacher doesn't know, keeps making more and more errors, and the teacher keeps shocking him more and more and more on this big shock box, until there's a point at which he stops responding, he's probably unconscious, and instead of quitting, the experiment says you must continue to the very end, which is 450 volts. 2/3 of all ordinary Americans went to the end, 2/3. But in the many experiments he did 2 that have been ignored. In one, you come in ready to help, to be a teacher, and when you sit down, you observe somebody from the previous experiment going all the way. In another study, you come in and you observe 2 people refusing. So they are 2 social models of evil and good. And you know what happens? If the base rate is 60% who blindly obey, when you see somebody go all the way, it becomes a negative model for you, and 91% of all the population in those studies go all the way. But if you see people rebel, 90% refuse to go on. And so this is something we have to deal with. Why is it that it's so important for most societies for people to blindly obey authority? To blindly obey authority means be mindless, don't be mindful, don't do critical thinking, just do what you're told. And that then links up. If parents say, mind your own business, don't get involved, don't think too deeply about it, just do what I say. That is one of the worst things that could happen in any society. An unthinking society is a society that's vulnerable to these psychopaths, because they say, I have the answer, I have the way, I have the money, I have the power, I have the status, I can give you jobs. All you have to do is do it my way. Long before the corporate psychopaths, there was Hitler and Stalin and the others, and those totalitarian dictators had the same message. Give me your power, and I will give you security, or the illusion of security, and all you have to do is do what I tell you to do. Many people are willing to give up freedom because it has associated responsibility for the illusion of security. For somebody to say, okay, you're a good boy, you're a good child, now go play in the corner and don't bother the grown-ups. And so in that sense, it's a prolongation of immaturity. That is, as children, authorities, most parents, most teachers are good. Following their lead is good. But nobody teaches us to make the distinction between just authority that deserves our respect and unjust authority that deserves defiance. And that's a big problem, because as you grow older, then here are these psychopaths, political, religious, organizational, industrial, who put on the same mask and say, follow me. And you say, okay, without thinking why, where, when, and how.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say to people is pay attention to your gut. I think a lot of people ignore the gut feeling, the instinct. And you've got instinct, and you should pay attention to it. I think, you know, human beings are maybe the only animal species that will ignore that gut instinct.
The problem isn't that our leaders or our corporate managers are sociopaths, so some of them are, nor is it that the world is run by dark, shadowy figures that are malignant in their intention. I know these people, they're not that. But the organizations themselves and the systems are sociopathic. You can't expect them to have a conscience. You can't expect them to have a heart. You have to live within their nature. You can't regard nature itself as being evil. Nature doesn't have a valence. What does have a valence is the human heart and what it can express itself around through widening the circle of empathy.
Why should I care more about empathy than the next guy? None of the rich guys made it big through empathy. Why should I give up my comfort and my aspirations? We all want to win, don't we?
What I see over and over again is the collision, if you will, in the organizational systems, that you have somebody at the very top of the organization, and, you know, I work with a number of these people, and they're all making what I think most any of us would consider just extreme amounts of money. And if you think about the effect of this on psychologically on the people, it becomes a situation where money and the desire for money simply begets more desire. And I think that's a very primitive, from what we understand about human psychology, that's a very primitive state of desire and appetite, to see it as limitless and to be able to almost devour anything. And usually in our own process of maturation, we have the experience of encountering limits, right? And we learn about reality testing, and, well, I might want that or feel I could take all of that, but in fact, I understand my limits. And I think there is something certainly that goes on psychologically where those limits become removed.
These are crazy times, and people are crazy within them, and institutions are crazy within them, and this is how it will be as we try to adjust to the idea that everything we know is wrong. But I think there are some things we can do to make them better, and one of them is to give up on the pursuit of happiness, in the sense that happiness is something you get from more.
Consumer culture rests on dissatisfaction. When we long for something, our notion of that is that unless we can get it, we're never going to be happy. And in the consumer society, the fact that you can't get it means there's something wrong with you.
For me, one of the problems is when you talk about good and evil, villains and heroes, it's really a sharp distinction. But really, there's a gray line between them that no one who does evil ever thinks what they're doing is evil. Evil, there's a slippery slope that we know evil begins with a small first step, signing a petition. In the Milgram experiments, is pressing a 15-volt switch that the person hardly feels. It's telling a racist joke, which doesn't seem so bad. But once you do that, once you cross the line between good and evil, then it becomes easier and easier to take the next step, the next step, the next step, until finally what you're doing is now irrefutably evil. One of the great heroes of this century is the former president of Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who was a playwright. And he's faced with the terrible repression of the communist regime. And as a playwright, instead of going about his business writing plays, he now opposes. He said, this is wrong. And he gets put in jail, and from jail he sends letters saying, this is wrong. This is wrong, a wrong way for the Czech people to live. And ultimately, he was able to persuade millions of people to change their passivity.
Každý z nás zná takový podivný pocit ušpiněnosti, zapatlanosti. Pocit, který se nazývá výčitka svědomí. Když uděláme nějaký kompromis, o němž si nejsme jistí, jestli byl dobrý, tak na něj myslíme znovu a znovu a trošku se vlastně trápíme. I když ten kompromis nám možná usnadnil život ve srovnání se situací, která by nastala, kdybychom ho neučinili. Ale já osobně u sebe pozoruji to, že když se zachovám statečně, je to vlastně ze zbabělosti, protože se bojím, že se dostaví ten pocit té zalepkanosti, že jsem něco udělal špatně, že jsem udělal nežádoucí kompromis, že jsem uhnul a naopak, když něco udělám, u čeho vím, že jsem to udělal správně, tak mám až takový pocit lehké euforie.
Před letošním 21. srpnem jsem řekl, že ještě nenastal okamžik, kdy jde o vše a je třeba vložit do hry celé své srdce. Mám pocit, že takový okamžik nadešel dnes.
The reason that most people do nothing is that they respect every mother in the world who tells their child, mind your own business, don't get involved. People get programmed not to look at evil, to mind their own business, not to get involved, not to take the heroic action. And essentially what it is, we're also being programmed to be egocentric.
Here it is. We're being told that one way or another,